The massive doors of the Galactic Federation's High Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Zethkari walked through them with the confident stride of someone who believed he was about to solve one of the galaxy's most pressing problems. His purple skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and his four eyes moved independently as he scanned the assembled delegates from dozens of different worlds. The chamber was a marvel of engineering, built inside a hollow asteroid that had been converted into the orbital station Nexus Prime, representatives from across the galaxy sat in seats designed for their various body types. Some breathed methane, others required high-pressure environments, and a few existed as pure energy, beings contained in special chambers. But they all shared one common concern: what to do about the humans. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the human section, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched the alien ambassador approach the central podium. Next to him, Dr. Lisa Hayes adjusted her glasses and made notes on her tablet. They had been Earth's representatives to the Federation for 3 years now, and they knew this meeting would be different. The other species had been whispering among themselves for weeks, and the humans had been deliberately excluded from preliminary discussions. Zethkari's voice carried easily through the chamber's translation systems. Honored delegates, we face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our peaceful alliance. The humans of Earth continue to demand full membership in our Federation, despite their obvious unsuitability for civilized galactic society. Several delegates nodded their agreement. The Crystalline Collective's representative chimed in harmonic support, while the gas giant dwellers of Titan 7 released approving chemical signals. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he remained silent. Lisa placed a calming hand on his arm. They are aggressive, unpredictable, and worst of all, they reproduce at an alarming rate, Zethkari continued. Their homeworld is a Class 9 Deathworld, yet they treat it as if it were a garden planet. They have survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and mass extinctions that would have eliminated any civilized species. This is not normal behavior. The Velteran ambassador paused for effect, his four eyes focusing on different sections of the audience. They wage war against their own kind with weapons that could sterilize entire continents. They consume toxic substances for pleasure. They voluntarily expose themselves to radiation from their star to change their skin color. They keep predatory animals as companions. The evidence is clear. Humans are fundamentally incompatible with galactic civilization. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The spider-like delegates from Arachnos Prime clicked their mandibles in approval. The floating jellyfish representatives from the water world of Aquatica pulsed with supportive bioluminescence. Even the normally neutral silicon-based life forms from the asteroid belt seemed to vibrate with agreement. Jake started to stand, but Lisa pulled him back down. Wait, she whispered. Let him finish. Zethkari raised one of his forearms for silence. However, I propose a solution that will address this problem once and for all. We will offer the humans a test. If they can successfully complete it, they will be granted full Federation membership with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. If they fail, they will withdraw their application and accept limited associate status for the next century. The chamber fell silent. This was unexpected. The other species had assumed they would simply vote to reject human membership permanently. Dr. Hayes leaned forward in her seat, her scientific curiosity overriding her diplomatic training. The test I propose is simple, Zethkari continued. We will challenge the humans to colonize a Class 15 Deathworld. Kepler 442c to be precise. The planet has defeated 3 previous colonization attempts by advanced species. The gravity is 3 times galactic standard. The atmosphere contains corrosive compounds that dissolve most materials. The native wildlife includes pack hunting, predators that have evolved specifically to kill anything that lands on the surface. Seismic activity makes permanent structures nearly impossible to maintain. The ambassador's voice took on a tone of mock concern. Of course, we would provide them with the same level of support we give all colonization efforts. Basic scanning data, standard survival equipment, and emergency evacuation if the situation becomes hopeless. Which, let us be honest, it certainly will. Several delegates made sounds that their species considered laughter. The methane breathers released amused gas clouds. The energy beings flickered with what might have been humor. Even the usually serious rock creatures from the high-gravity world seemed to find the proposal entertaining. Jake could feel the anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had learned during his years in the military that the best response to an insult was often to accept the challenge and prove the insulter wrong. Lisa was making rapid calculations on her tablet, her scientific mind already working through the logistics of what would be required. The beauty of this solution, Zethkari concluded, is that it allows the humans to save face while demonstrating the reality of their limitations. They can attempt the impossible, fail with honor, and accept their proper place in the galactic community. No species can be expected to colonize a Class 15 Deathworld with minimal support. It is not a matter of courage or determination. It is simply impossible. The chamber erupted in discussion. Delegates turned to each other, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sound, light, and chemical signals. Some seemed pleased with the proposal, others appeared concerned about the ethics of what amounted to a suicide mission. A few looked directly at the human section, curious about how Earth's representatives would respond. Jake stood up slowly, his movement causing a gradual silence to fall over the chamber. All eyes, sensors, and awareness focused on him. He could feel the weight of representing his entire species in this moment. Lisa stood beside him, her expression calm but determined. "Ambassador Zethkari," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "On behalf of Earth and humanity, I accept your challenge." The silence that followed was profound. Several delegates made sounds of surprise. The energy beings flickered rapidly, indicating shock. Even Zethkari's 4 eyes widened slightly, though he quickly regained his composure. "You accept?" The ambassador asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "You understand the terms? A Class 15 Deathworld? Minimal support. No guarantee of rescue if conditions prove impossible." "We understand perfectly," Lisa said, stepping forward. "We also understand that you've underestimated us before. When we first applied for Federation membership, you said humans couldn't possibly understand faster-than-light travel. We proved you wrong. You said we couldn't adapt to artificial gravity environments. We proved you wrong. You said we couldn't work cooperatively with alien species. We proved you wrong." Jake nodded. "Now you're saying we can't survive on a Class 15 Deathworld. We look forward to proving you wrong again." The chamber erupted in chaos. Some delegates seemed outraged that the humans would accept such a dangerous challenge. Others appeared excited by the prospect of finally seeing human limitations exposed. A few looked genuinely concerned about the ethical implications of what they had just witnessed. ZS single quotes Carey raised his arms for silence, but it took several minutes for order to be restored. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "Very well. The challenge is accepted. You will have 6 months to prepare your expedition. The Federation will provide basic scanning data about Kepler 442c and standard colonization equipment. The test will be considered successful if you can establish a permanent, self-sustaining colony within 1 standard year." "Agreed," Jake said. Simply. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, many stopped to offer the humans what they considered words of sympathy or encouragement. The crystalline beings chimed sadly. The aquatic species pulsed with colors of mourning. Even some of the more hostile delegates seemed to regret what they viewed as humanity's impending doom. But Jake and Lisa weren't listening to the condolences. They were already planning. They had accepted an impossible challenge, and now they had to figure out how to make the impossible possible. It wouldn't be the first time humans have faced overwhelming odds. It wouldn't be the last. As they walked back to their quarters, Lisa was already making lists of specialists they would need, equipment to requisition, and research to conduct. Jake was thinking about the kind of people who would volunteer for a mission that the galaxy's most advanced species considered Certain death? Neither of them noticed Zethkari watching them leave, his 4 eyes reflecting something that might have been doubt. For the first time since proposing his solution, the ambassador wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late now. The challenge had been accepted, and the humans were already preparing to prove the galaxy wrong. Once again, the colony ship Endeavour hung in Earth's orbit like a metal cathedral against the stars. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison and Dr. Lisa Hayes accepted the Federation's challenge, and the massive vessel represented humanity's answer to what the galaxy considered an impossible test. Workers in environmental suits moved across the hull making final preparations, their magnetic boots clicking against the reinforced steel plating that would protect 500 volunteers on their journey to hell inside the ship's command center. Jake studied the holographic display showing Kepler 442c in all its hostile glory. The planet spun slowly in the blue light, its surface scarred by massive storm systems and volcanic activity. The data the Federation had provided was basic at best, little more than atmospheric composition and gravity readings. Everything else, the humans would have to discover for themselves. "The atmospheric processors are loaded and ready," reported Pete Johnson, the mission's chief engineer. He was a compact man with calloused hands and the kind of practical intelligence that came from years of making broken things work again. "We've got enough equipment to start converting the air in a 50-kilometer radius, assuming we can find a stable location to set them up." Lisa looked up from her tablet where she had been reviewing the biological surveys. "The Federation's data on local wildlife is almost useless. They mention large predators but no details about behavior, hunting patterns, or territorial ranges. We're going in blind." "That's probably intentional," said Maria Santos, the expedition's materials specialist. She had volunteered for the mission after her husband died in a mining accident on Luna, leaving her with nothing to lose and everything to prove. They want us to fail. Why would they give us information that might help us succeed? Dr. Kevin. Wright nodded from his position at the biological station. He was younger than the others, fresh out of university, but his enthusiasm for xenobiology had made him eager to volunteer for humanity's most dangerous mission. "I've been studying the atmospheric composition. The corrosive compounds they mentioned are similar to what we find in Earth's most extreme environments. There are microorganisms on our planet that actually thrive in similar conditions." Sam Tucker, the mission's security chief, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. He was a former Marine who had served in the Belt Wars and the Mars Rebellion, and his scarred face told the story of someone who had survived impossible odds before. "Predators are predators, no matter what planet they're from. They have patterns, weaknesses, and limits. We just need to figure out what those are before they figure out how to kill us." The ship's intercom crackled to life, announcing the final boarding call for colonists. Jake watched through the observation windows as the last groups of volunteers made their way aboard. They came from every corner of Earth and every walk of life. Former soldiers like Sam, scientists like Kevin, engineers like Pete and Maria, farmers, doctors, teachers, and craftspeople. What they all shared was a willingness to risk everything for the chance to prove humanity belonged among the stars. You sure about this?" Lisa asked quietly, moving to stand beside Jake at the window. "We're taking 500 people to a planet that has killed everyone who tried to live there." Jake turned to look at her, seeing the doubt in her eyes. "Lisa, do you remember what you told me when we first met the Federation Council? You said that humans don't back down from challenges just because they're dangerous? You said we solve problems by facing them head-on." She smiled slightly. "I also said we were crazy enough to try things that sensible species wouldn't attempt." "Maybe that's exactly what we need to be," Jake replied. "The Federation species are too civilized, too dependent on their technology and their comfortable lives. They've forgotten what it means to adapt and survive. We haven't." The ship's engines began their startup sequence, a deep thrumming that vibrated through the hull. Pete Johnson's voice came over the intercom, confirming that all systems were green for departure. The Endeavour slowly pulled away from Earth's orbital docks, beginning its journey toward the edge of human space and beyond. The trip to Kepler 442c would take 8 months, and Jake had planned to use every day of that time preparing for what they would find. The ship's training facilities were converted into survival schools where colonists learned to recognize dangerous atmospheric conditions, treat acid burns, and identify signs of seismic activity. The agricultural bays became testing grounds for modified Earth crops that might survive in alien soil. Dr. Wright spent his time in the ship's laboratories, studying samples of Earth's most extreme environment organisms. He had brought cultures of bacteria that lived in boiling acid, fungi that thrived in radioactive waste, and plants that grew in toxic soil. His theory was that if Earth life could adapt to such conditions, it might be possible to create hybrid organisms that could survive on Kepler-442c. Maria Santos worked with her team to develop new construction techniques using materials they expected to find on the planet. The Federation had provided basic information about the mineral composition, and she was designing building methods that could work with local resources. Her experience with mining operations had taught her that every planet had useful materials if you knew how to find and process them. Sam Tucker organized the colonists into security teams, teaching them how to work together against unknown threats. He had studied the limited information about the planet's predators and developed tactics for dealing with pack hunters in low-visibility conditions. His military experience told him that the first few encounters with local wildlife would determine whether the colony survived or became food for alien predators. As the weeks passed, the ship became a floating university dedicated to survival. Colonists learned to repair equipment with salvaged parts, grow food in hostile conditions, and treat injuries without advanced medical facilities. They practiced working together under stress, building trust that would be essential when they faced the real dangers of their new home. The Federation observers aboard the ship watched these preparations with a mixture of fascination and doubt. They had expected the humans to spend the journey in recreation and comfort, as civilized species did during long voyages. Instead, they saw a species transforming itself into something harder and more capable with each passing day. They are preparing for war, observed Kethmira, the Veltran monitor assigned to document the expedition. She had 4 eyes like Ambassador Zethkari, but hers held curiosity rather than contempt. Not war against enemies, but war against the planet itself. Her colleague, a methane-breathing delegate from the frozen worlds, released a chemical signal of confusion. Our species prepare for colonization with better equipment and more comfortable living conditions. The humans are deliberately making their lives harder. Kethmira's 4 eyes tracked the movement of human colonists through the ship's corridors. Perhaps that is why our species failed where they might succeed. We try to bring civilization to hostile worlds. They are becoming something that can survive in hostile worlds. The turning point came during the 6th month of the journey. A malfunction in the ship's life support systems created a toxic gas leak that would have killed most species within minutes. The human crew responded with a speed and efficiency that amazed the alien observers. Within hours, they had not only repaired the damage, but improved the system's design to prevent future failures. How did they do that? Asked the methane breather, his translation device struggling to convey his species concept of amazement. Kethmira studied the reports of the incident. They treated the emergency as a learning opportunity. Instead of simply fixing the problem, they used it to better understand how to survive when their technology fails. As the Endeavour approached the edge of Federation space, the human colonists had transformed from a collection of volunteers into something resembling a unified organism. They moved with purpose, communicated efficiently, and solved problems with a creativity that impressed even their alien observers. Jake stood on the bridge as the ship's sensors began picking up signals from Kepler 442c, the planet appeared on. The main screen, a swirling mass of storms and volcanic activity that looked like a vision of hell. But the humans aboard the Endeavour no longer saw it as an impossible challenge. They saw it as home. All hands prepare for a final approach. Jake announced over the intercom. We're about to show the galaxy what humans can do when they have nothing to lose and everything to prove. The ship's engines adjusted course, carrying 500 humans toward a world that had never known the touch of Earth life. Behind them, the Federation observers prepared their reports, already wondering if they had underestimated humanity once again. The landing craft screamed through the atmosphere of Kepler 442, see like a falling star, its hull glowing red-hot from the friction of entry. Captain Amy Rodriguez gripped the controls with white knuckles as the ship bucked and rolled through the turbulent air, fighting against winds that would have torn apart most civilian vessels. Behind her, 50 colonists strapped into their crash seats endured the violent descent in grim silence, knowing that this was only the beginning of their trials. Hull temperature at critical levels, reported the ship's computer in its maddeningly calm voice. Recommend immediate course correction. Amy's jaw tightened as she fought to keep the craft stable. There is no course correction. We're committed now. She had been flying for 15 years, through asteroid fields and combat zones, but nothing had prepared her for this. The planet's atmosphere was like flying through acid soup, eating away at the ship's protective coating with every second. They remained airborne through the observation windows. The colonists caught their first glimpse of their new home. The landscape below was a nightmare of jagged mountains, steaming valleys, and lakes that glowed with an unhealthy green light. Volcanic vents released pillars of toxic gas that rose like twisted fingers toward the storm-filled sky. Lightning crackled constantly between the clouds, illuminating a world that seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to land on its surface. "Landing zone coming up," Amy announced, her voice tight with concentration. The designated area was a relatively flat plain between two mountain ranges, chosen because it showed less seismic activity than the surrounding regions. As they descended, the colonists could see that the ground was covered with what looked like black glass, probably formed by repeated volcanic eruptions. The ship's proximity alarms began screaming as they approached the surface. Amy could see cracks appearing in the landing zone, indicating that the ground might not be as stable as the orbital surveys had suggested. She had seconds to make a decision that would determine whether her passengers lived or died. "Brace for impact," she called out, pulling back on the controls in a desperate attempt to soften their landing. The ship hit the ground hard, bounced twice, and skidded across the glassy surface before coming to rest against a cluster of dark rocks. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the cabin as systems failed and sparks flew from damaged circuits. Jake Morrison was the first to unbuckle his restraints, moving quickly to check on the other colonists. Several had minor injuries from the rough landing, but miraculously, no one had been killed. "Sound off," he called out. "Everyone check the person next to you." Dr. Lisa Hayes was already moving through the cabin with her medical kit, treating cuts and bruises while assessing the more serious injuries. "We've got 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and several concussions," she reported. "Nothing life-threatening, but we need to get them to the medical bay as soon as possible." Pete Johnson was examining the ship's systems, his face grim. As he studied the damage reports, main power is down to 40%. Life support is functional but running on backup systems. The communication array is completely destroyed. He looked up at Jake with worry in his eyes. "We're on our own." Sam Tucker had moved to the weapons locker, distributing sidearms to the security team. "I'm reading movement outside," he reported, studying the ship's external sensors. Large forms approximately 200 meters away and closing. He paused, watching the readings change. "They're not moving randomly? This looks like organized behavior." Through the ship's reinforced windows, the colonists could see their first glimpse of the planet's native wildlife. The creatures were unlike anything in Earth's fossil record, combining features that seemed borrowed from different evolutionary paths. They moved on 6 legs, each ending in claws that could gouge deep furrows in the volcanic rock. Their bodies were covered in scales that shifted color like living armor, and their heads bore multiple eyes that seemed to track the landed ship with intelligent purpose. "They're beautiful," whispered Dr. Kevin Wright, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. Look at how they coordinate their movements. They're not just predators, they're social predators with complex behavioral patterns. Maria Santos was more practical in her assessment. They're also the size of earth elephants with claws that can cut through stone. Beautiful or not, they're dangerous. She was already examining the ship's hull, checking for weak points that might give the creatures access to the interior. The first creature approached the ship cautiously, its color-shifting scales rippling through patterns that might have been some form of communication. It moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, testing the air with organs that resembled a combination of nose and tongue. When it touched the ship's hull with one claw, the metal rang like a bell. "It's testing our defenses," Sam observed, his military training helping him interpret the creature's behavior. "They're not just attacking randomly, they're learning about us." The ship's internal atmosphere was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. As the life support system struggled to filter out the toxic gases that were seeping through microscopic cracks in the hull, the air tasted of sulfur and metal, and several colonists were beginning to show signs of respiratory distress. "We can't stay in here much longer," Lisa announced, her medical training making her acutely aware of the danger. "The atmospheric filters are failing. We need to establish a safe area outside or we'll all die of poisoning." Jake made the decision that would define their first hours on the planet. "We're going out there. Sam, take your security team and establish a perimeter. Pete, I need you to assess what we can salvage from the ship. Kevin, start taking readings on the local environment. Everyone else, start unloading the essential supplies." The ship's cargo bay doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the hostile world beyond. The first breath of alien air burned their throats despite the breathing masks they all wore. The gravity was crushing, nearly 3 times what they had experienced on Earth, making every movement feel like they were carrying heavy weights. The creatures outside reacted to the opening of the ship with increased agitation. Their color patterns shifted rapidly, and several of them began making sounds that resonated through the ground like distant thunder. More of them appeared from behind the dark rocks, until the colonists counted at least 20 of the massive predators surrounding their landing site. "They're not attacking," Sam reported, his weapon trained on the nearest creature. "They're watching, learning." He had seen similar behavior from Wolfpacks and military units. "They're deciding whether we're prey or threat." The first human to step onto the surface of Kepler 442c was Jake Morrison, his boots crunching on the volcanic glass that covered the ground. The crushing gravity made him feel like he was walking through deep water, and the toxic atmosphere burned his lungs, even through the breathing apparatus. But he was alive, and that was more than the Federation had expected. "Welcome to hell," he muttered, then raised his voice so the others could hear. "Let's get to work." The colonists moved with practiced efficiency, unloading critical supplies, while keeping watch for any sign of aggressive behavior from the native wildlife. The creatures maintained their distance but continued to observe, their alien intelligence clearly processing this new development in their territory. As the human activity increased, the planet seemed to respond with increased hostility. The wind picked up, carrying clouds of corrosive dust that forced the colonists to work in shifts to avoid overexposure. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with what might have been seismic activity or the movement of something large beneath the surface. "Shelter first," Jake announced, watching as his people struggled against the hostile environment. "We need a safe place to regroup and plan our next move." The Federation observers, monitoring from their safe distance in orbit, watched the landing with a mixture of fascination and horror. They had expected the humans to be dead within hours of touching the planet's surface. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented, a species that refused to give up even when faced with impossible odds. "They should be fleeing," observed Kathmira, her 4 eyes tracking the human activity on her screens. "Any reasonable species would have called for evacuation by now." Her methane-breathing colleague released a chemical signal of bewilderment. "Perhaps they do not understand the danger they face." Kathmira studied the data more carefully. "No, they understand perfectly. They are simply choosing to fight instead of flee. She paused, considering the implications. I begin to suspect that Ambassador Zethkari may have made an error in judgment. On the planet's surface, the first human settlement on Kepler 442c was taking shape. It was crude, dangerous, and probably doomed to failure. But it was also proof that humanity had no intention of accepting defeat, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. 3 months had passed since the crash landing, and the human colony on Kepler 442c looked nothing like what the Federation had expected to find. Where there should have been desperate survivors huddled around failing equipment, instead there was a thriving settlement that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The colonists had not only survived the planet's hostile environment, but had begun to turn it to their advantage. Dr. Lisa Hayes stood at the edge of the colony's main compound, watching the sunrise paint the volcanic landscape in shades of red and gold. The breathing mask that had been essential during their first weeks was now hanging loosely around her neck, needed only during the worst atmospheric conditions. Her body had adapted to the toxic air with a speed that surprised even her medical training, developing an immunity that the Federation's finest scientists would have considered impossible. The atmospheric processors are working better than we hoped, reported Pete Johnson, approaching with his daily status report. His engineering team had managed to salvage most of the critical equipment from the crashed landing craft, but more importantly, they had learned to work with the planet's unique resources. The local minerals are actually improving the efficiency of our air filtration systems. Lisa nodded, checking her tablet where she tracked the colony's vital signs. The medical reports are even better? We've had 0 cases of respiratory infection in the past month, and the colonists who were struggling with the gravity are now moving normally. She paused, studying the data with the wonder of someone witnessing evolution in real time. Kevin's biological research is showing remarkable results. Dr. Kevin Wright had become something of a celebrity among the colonists for his breakthrough discoveries about the planet's ecosystem. His laboratory, built into a natural cave system, was where he studied the complex relationships between the native life forms and their environment. What he had found challenged everything the Federation thought they knew about life on Deathworlds. The stalkers aren't just predators, Kevin explained to Jake Morrison during their morning briefing. The creatures that had surrounded their landing site were now a constant presence around the colony, but their behavior had changed dramatically. They're ecosystem engineers. They actually help maintain the balance of the planet's environment. Jake studied the observation reports that Kevin's team had compiled. The stalkers, as the colonists had named them, moved in complex patterns that seemed random until you understood their purpose. They were cultivating certain types of plants, eliminating others, and managing the territory in ways that kept the more dangerous native life forms at bay. Sam's security teams have been working with them, Kevin continued. Not directly, but by understanding their territorial markers and communication patterns. We're essentially living in their managed territory now, under their protection. Tucker had initially been skeptical of any approach that didn't involve weapons and defensive barriers, but his military experience had taught him to adapt tactics based on changing conditions, and the conditions on Kepler 442c had changed dramatically. The stalkers were no longer viewed as threats, but as inadvertent allies in humanity's struggle for survival. They respond to chemical signals, Sam reported, his scarred face showing the satisfaction of a soldier who had figured out how to work with local conditions. Maria's team has been synthesizing compounds that tell them we're not a threat to their territory. In return, they keep the really dangerous stuff away from our settlement. Maria Santos had become the colony's expert on local materials and their applications. Her background in mining had prepared her for the challenges of working with alien minerals. But she had discovered that Kepler 442c's resources were far more valuable than anyone had imagined. The planet's extreme conditions had created unique crystalline structures with properties that could revolutionize technology throughout the galaxy. The power crystals we found generate energy more efficiently than anything in Federation technology. Maria explained to the colony's leadership council. The building materials we've developed are stronger than steel, but lighter than aluminum. We're not just surviving here, we're discovering resources that could change everything. The colony's success had not gone unnoticed by the smaller predators that shared the planet with the stalkers. Creatures the size of Earth's wolves had begun approaching the settlement, drawn by the sense of human food and the safety provided by the stalkers' protection. Dr. Wright had been studying these smaller beings with increasing excitement. They're remarkably intelligent, he reported during one of his evening presentations. They've learned to associate humans with safety and food. Some of them are even showing signs of domestication behavior. He paused, watching through the settlement's reinforced windows as several of the Volf-sized creatures played together near the colony's edge. I think we might be witnessing the beginning of a new partnership between human and alien life. The colonists had begun calling these smaller creatures runners because of their speed and agility. Unlike the massive stalkers, the runners were curious about humans and seemed to enjoy interacting with them. Several colonists had begun leaving food for specific individuals, and a few of the creatures had started following certain humans around the settlement. It's not just the animals, observed Dr. Wright. The plant life is responding to our presence in ways that suggest intelligence or at least complex adaptive behavior. The food crops we brought from Earth are thriving, but they're also changing in response to the local environment. The agricultural team had managed to establish gardens that produced food in quantities that exceeded their original projections. The Earth plants had adapted to the alien soil and atmosphere, developing new characteristics that made them more nutritious and resistant to local diseases. Some of the native plants had begun growing closer to the human settlement, as if they were seeking the benefits of association with the colonist. Jake Morrison stood on the observation platform that Pete Johnson's team had built at the highest point of the settlement. From here, he could see the full extent of what they had accomplished. The colony had grown from a desperate crash site to a thriving community with permanent buildings, functioning infrastructure, and a population that was not only surviving, but prospering. The Federation monitors are getting nervous, reported the colony's communications officer, a former Navy signalman named Tom Bradley. They've been requesting daily reports, and their questions are getting more specific. They want to know how we're doing things that their own species couldn't manage. Lisa joined Jake on the platform, her medical training allowing her to see the changes in the colonists that others might miss. We're not the same species that left Earth, she observed quietly. The planet is changing us, and we're changing. This is evolution in action. The most remarkable change was in the colonists themselves. The crushing gravity that had made their first days a nightmare was now barely noticeable. The toxic atmosphere that had required constant breathing protection was now manageable with only occasional assistance. The extreme temperatures and corrosive conditions that should have killed them had instead made them stronger. We're adapting faster than should be possible, Lisa continued. Human genetics are more flexible than anyone realized. We're not just surviving extreme conditions, we're evolving to thrive in them. The evening meal was a celebration of their success. The colonists gathered in the main hall, sharing food that was a mixture of earth crops and carefully prepared native plants. The runners had learned to associate this gathering with food sharing, and several of them waited patiently outside the hall's windows, their alien eyes reflecting the warm light from within. 3 months ago, the Federation expected us to be dead, Jake announced to the assembled colonists. Instead, we've built a home. We've made allies. We've discovered resources that could benefit the entire galaxy. He paused, looking around at the faces of people who had been transformed by their experience. We've proven that humans don't just survive impossible conditions. We thrive in them. The applause that followed was heard by the stalkers patrolling the settlement's perimeter. The massive creatures had learned to associate human celebration sounds with increased activity and vigilance, and they adjusted their patrol patterns accordingly. The runners waiting outside the hall added their own vocalizations to the mix, creating a chorus of human and alien voices that echoed across the volcanic landscape in orbit above the planet. The Federation observers watched their instruments with growing amazement. The human settlement was not just surviving, but expanding. The colonists were not just adapting, but evolving. Most shocking of all, they were not just enduring the Deathworld, but transforming it into something approaching a garden. "This is impossible," muttered Kethmira, her 4 eyes studying the reports that contradicted everything she had been taught about colonization. "No species should be able to achieve what we are witnessing." Her colleague released a chemical signal of deep confusion. "Perhaps we have underestimated the humans more severely than we realized." Kethmira began composing her report to the Federation Council, knowing that her words would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The test that was supposed to demonstrate human limitations 1 year after the crash landing that was supposed to mark humanity's failure, Ambassador Zethkari stepped out of his shuttle onto the surface of Kepler 442c and found himself in a world he no longer recognized. Where his species records showed nothing but volcanic wasteland and deadly predators, he now saw thriving cities connected by roads that curved gracefully around the natural landscape. Gardens of earth and alien plants grew side by side, while creatures that should have been hunting humans instead moved peacefully through the settlements as if they belonged there. The landing pad where his shuttle touched down was made from local materials that gleamed like polished stone but felt warm under his feet. Human workers moved efficiently around the platform, directing traffic and managing cargo with the easy confidence of people who had made this hostile world their home. Several of the Volf-like creatures the humans called runners watched the proceedings with intelligent eyes, their presence accepted as naturally as guard dogs on any civilized world. "Welcome to New Terra," said Jake Morrison, approaching with the same calm authority Zethkari remembered from their first meeting at the Federation Council. But the human looked different now, stronger and more confident, as if the Deathworld had refined him rather than breaking him down. "I hope your journey was comfortable." Zethkari's 4 eyes moved independently as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he said, his translation device struggling to convey his species' concept of complete bewilderment. "Our records indicate this location was uninhabitable volcanic terrain." "It was," replied Dr. Lisa Hayes, joining them with a warm smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see the alien ambassador. "We changed it, or maybe it changed us." The relationship turned out to be more cooperative than anyone expected. The ambassador's shuttle had landed in what the humans called Central City, the largest of 3 major settlements that now dotted the planet's surface. As they walked through the streets, Zethkari saw architecture that blended human engineering with alien aesthetics, creating buildings that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. The air that should have killed him within minutes was now clean enough to breathe with only minimal filtration assistance. "The atmospheric processors work differently than we originally planned," explained Pete Johnson, who had taken on the role of Chief Infrastructure Coordinator. "Instead of fighting the planet's natural systems, we learned to work with them. The local ecosystem actually helps maintain the air quality now." They passed a group of human children playing with young runners in a park that had been carefully designed around natural rock formations. The sight of interspecies friendship developing so naturally would have been remarkable anywhere in the galaxy, but on a Class 15 Deathworld it seemed like something from a fantasy story. "The children were born here," Lisa noted, observing Zethkari's amazement. "They're already showing adaptations that would take other species generations to develop. Enhanced lung capacity, improved resistance to atmospheric toxins, better balance in high-gravity conditions." Dr. Kevin Wright appeared as if summoned, his enthusiasm for xenobiology as strong as ever, but now backed by a year of practical experience. "We've cataloged over 300 species of native life, and almost all of them have shown some form of positive interaction with human settlement. The ecosystem here is incredibly complex but also remarkably cooperative." They walked through the research district, where Wright's expanded laboratories occupied several buildings carved into natural cave systems. Through the windows, Zethkari could see human scientists working alongside specimens of local flora and fauna, studying rather than fearing the life forms that had been considered universally hostile. The stalkers have become our partners in terraforming, Wright continued, gesturing toward a group of the massive creatures visible in the distance. They understand environmental management in ways we're still learning from. In exchange for certain minerals they need for their biology, they help us maintain the balance between human development and planetary ecology. Maria Santos met them at the mining and materials facility, where local crystals were being processed into components that exceeded Federation technology standards. The rare earth elements here are unlike anything we've seen before, she explained, showing Zethkari samples that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. We're producing energy cells that are 3 times more efficient than the best Federation designs. The ambassador's translator struggled to keep up with the flood of technical information. Everything he was seeing contradicted not just the Federation's expectations, but their understanding of how advanced civilizations were supposed to develop. Humans were supposed to be primitive, aggressive, and unsuited for complex galactic society. Instead, they had created something that looked like the next step in evolutionary development. How many people live here now? Zethkari asked, watching the steady flow of human activity through the city streets. About 2,000 in Central City, Jake replied. 5,000 total across all 3 settlements. We've had 3 supply missions from Earth, but mostly we've been self-sufficient since month 6. The numbers were staggering. Most Federation species required centuries to establish successful colonies on Class 10 worlds with extensive technological support. Humans had not only survived on a Class 15 world, but had created a thriving civilization in a single year. With minimal outside assistance, they visited the agricultural districts where earth crops grew in perfect harmony with native plants, creating food systems that were more productive than anything the Federation had achieved on garden worlds. They toured the manufacturing centers where human ingenuity combined with alien materials to produce technologies that were already obsoleting Federation standard equipment, but it was the cultural center that truly amazed Zethkari. Here, humans had created art that incorporated alien aesthetics, music that used sounds from the local environment, and literature that told stories of cooperation between species. Children born on Kepler 442c played games that combined human creativity with native wildlife behavior, developing friendships that crossed species boundaries. This is not just survival, Zethkari observed, his 4 eyes struggling to take in everything at once. This is evolution in action. That's exactly what it is, Lisa agreed. We didn't just adapt to this world. We became part of it, and it became part of us. The formal inspection concluded with a meeting in the colony's council chamber, where human and alien representatives sat together to discuss the future. The runners that had adopted individual humans curled up quietly nearby, while through the windows, stalkers could be seen maintaining their eternal watch over the settlement. The Federation Council requires a formal report, Zethkari said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that would have been impossible a year ago. They need to know whether the colonization test has been successful. Jake Morrison leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What do you think, Ambassador? Have we passed your test? Zethkari looked around. The chamber at the impossible site of thriving human civilization on a world that should have been their graveyard. You have exceeded every possible measure of success, he admitted. But I must ask, how? How did you achieve what our most advanced species could not? We stopped trying to conquer the planet and started learning to live with it, Lisa answered. Simply, your species approach hostile worlds as problems to be solved through technology and force. We approached this world as a partner to be understood and respected. The ambassador began composing his report as he prepared for the return. Journey to Federation space. He would have to explain to the council that not only had humans passed their impossible test, but they had demonstrated capabilities that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. There is one more thing, Jake said as they walked back to the landing pad. We've identified 17 other Class 15 Deathworlds within Federation space that show similar potential for human colonization. With your permission, we'd like to begin expanding our presence in this sector. Zethkari's 4 eyes widened in alarm. You want to colonize more Deathworlds? We want to help them become homes, Jake corrected. For humans, for any species. Willing to learn new ways of living, and for the native life that already calls them home. As the ambassador's shuttle lifted off from New Terra, he looked down at a planet that had been transformed from a symbol of impossible challenge into proof of unlimited possibility. The humans had not just survived their test. They had redefined what survival meant. His report to the Federation Council would change everything. Humanity would receive full membership, but more importantly, they would be recognized as the galaxy's experts in extreme world colonization. The species that other civilizations had tried to eliminate as a threat had instead become their greatest teachers. Below on the planet's surface, Jake Morrison and Lisa Hayes watched the shuttle disappear into the star-filled sky around them. Their impossible city continued its daily routine of turning a Deathworld into a garden, one day at a time. Think they'll ever understand how we did it? Lisa asked. Jake smiled, listening to